Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. Made another TBR. Yes, yes, yes. May is almost done. I mean, not really. It's still more than a week. But June is coming. And there are two really exciting things happening in June, I think. I mean, book-wise, there are lots of exciting things happening in June, probably, but book-wise, June is Pride Month, of course. So this video is about the books that I am planning on reading during Pride Month, but it's also Caribathon, which I will make a video about the books that I hope to read for Caribathon next week. And some of the books for Pride Month are sort of my favorite, two with one stone, but we will get to that in a minute. But anyway, so June is Pride Month, and I'm not reading enough literature by or about LGBTQ plus people. So good that there is Pride Month, to hit me that I'm not doing well and trying to do better. But anyway, so I picked 7 books because 7 is a number that I really like. There's also, don't ask, just roll with it. There's also a queer lit readathon happening in June, I believe from the 6th to the 12th, organized by Kathy Rogan, and the guest organizer this year, guest host is Jean from Jean's Book of Thought. I will leave links to that down below, but I'm not doing a readathon. But I might use the bingo card that they made because I love bingo cards. But I'm just reading LGBTQ plus literature during the month of June, so I'm not limiting myself to the Queer Lit Readathon 1 week. Anything else? Oh yes, the books that I chose, the 7 books that I hope to get to in June. I have to still buy them, most of them at least. So it might also be that if I can't get a book, that I replace it by something else. You know how I work with TBRs. In the end, I'm really happy if I read half of the books that I actually plan on reading and only replaced the other half and not, threw away the entire TBR. But anyway, no, let's stop with the preliminaries and just get into the books. That's what you're here for, right? So the first 2 books, I want to credit another booktuber, and that is Sajid from Books Are My Social Life. If you don't know him, you're probably living under a rock, but he is an absolutely fantastic booktuber. He lives in Trinidad, and he was born there. He's not just accidentally living there. He is Trinidadian, and he is from Indian descent with an Arab name, a Muslim living in Trinidad. That's how he defines himself. And he's really, really intelligent, talking about books. He reads a lot of authors of color, a lot of authors from the Caribbean. So if you want to have suggestions or recommendations about that, you should definitely check him out. And he is an absolute delight to watch because he can also be really, really funny. Anyway, and one of his favorite authors or new favorite authors is Shani Mutu. She was born in Dublin, but her parents are from Trinidad. She now lives in Toronto, I think, and she is considered a Trinidadian writer, at least a writer with Trinidadian roots. And so a lot of her books are set in Trinidad and Canada. This one is no exception. And we have the main character, Jonathan. Yes, I had to look that up. Yes, I know. Jonathan, when he was 9 years old, living in Toronto, also Trinidadian parents, his parents divorced, and he lost contact with his mother, Sid. And when Jonathan is a grown-up and he is a successful writer, he reconnects with his mother, only to realize, who moved to Trinidad, back to Trinidad, only to realize that his mother transitioned into his father, his second father, into a man called Sydney. So the book is about that. It might be that I really want to read this particular book by this author, but if it's difficult for me to get, I might switch to another book by the same author. And the second book that I quote-unquote stole from Sajid's Queer Lit Readathon TBR is a memoir, and I have to look up the author not to do anything stupid. Samra Habib. Um, we have always been there, a queer Muslim memoir, and it was published first in 2019. Samra Habib grew up in Pakistan as a Muslim, a queer Muslim. She didn't grow up, she grew up in Pakistan and she's a queer Muslim. And she encountered difficulties with her queer sexuality, and then her parents took refuge in Canada together with her, and there a whole new set of problems occurred with racism. So this is a memoir about her finding her way as well as a queer Muslim in Pakistan and as a Muslim in Canada. Sajid featured this memoir. Yes, I have scratch here. Sorry. Featured this memoir in his TBR, and I thought this sounded really interesting, so I want to read it as well. And thank you, Sajid, for both the books that ended up on my Pride Month TBR. Next on my TBR is a book by a favorite author of mine, Janet Winterson, who doesn't need an introduction, I guess, so I won't do it. And I read almost all of her books, but there are a couple of that I haven't read, and one of them is Wait, The Myth of Atlas and Heracles, and that is that she wrote this book in as a sort of commissioned work. Canongate publisher has this series about myths, ancient myths, and they asked authors, contemporary authors, to retell the myth in a different way. So she wrote a book about Atlas, having the weight of the world. And it's one of the books that for some reason I haven't read yet. And the book is not, I presume, an LGBTQ plus story, but the author is a lesbian woman. So I think that counts. I don't think in Pride Month you can only read stories in the books that are LGBTQ plus. I think an author who is lesbian also qualifies. And if not, damn it, it's my TBR and I want to read Janet Winterson. So there you go. The next two books that I hope to get to in June for Pride Month are both new releases and both speculative fiction. And the first one might sound familiar, and that is River Solomon, Sorrowland, which was published this month in May. And if it sounds familiar, it's probably because you watched my new releases video for May, and I featured this book. Now, Rivers Solomon is a Black American author. They were born in California, I'm sorry, in 1989, and they identify as non-binary, and they write speculative fiction. This one is set in a dystopian kind of future, and you have Vern, our main character, a pregnant woman who escapes an all-black compound into the woods, and there she gives birth to twins, and the story evolves from there. I know very little about the story. It's that kind of story that I don't want to know too much, just sort of the gist of what it is about. And I really like River Solomon's gritty way of approaching speculative fiction, and they always write about life in the margins, if you will. And I like the gritty approach, like I said, but also this idea of non-mainstream life that is always at the center of their books. So I hope that I can get this in time, and that I will be able to find time to read it. But it's something that I really, really look forward to. And the second new release is actually a release that will be released in June, on the 1st of June. So I couldn't possibly have the book yet, but I hope again that I will get it in time, and that's a debut historical fiction book and by Niveau, The Chosen and the Beautiful. Niveau is an Asian American author born in Illinois, and I really liked her short fiction. When the Tiger Came Down from the Mountain, and the other one is called something with the Empress. So the short fiction novella, short stories that I read from her, I really liked. And this is her debut novel, and it is set in the 1920s in the US. We have Jordan Baker as main character. She is queer and Asian and also adopted, if I can trust the blurb. And this is a different take on the 1920s, on the jazz age. I love the 20s, so when I saw that it was set in the 20s, I was immediately sold. And then with the twist of character that it's about a queer main character, a coming of age story with a completely different vintage point than we normally have when we read books about the 1920s jazz age. So I'm really excited for this one, again, coming out on the 1st of June. The next two books that I hope to read in June for Pride Month are also thanks to the recommendations or the mention by a booktuber, and this time it's Sean from Sean, the Book Maniac, whom you all know, of course. And the first one is, in addition to being a recommendation from a booktuber, is also again a two strikes with one stone book, because I will also read this for Caribathon, because the author is from Trinidad, and that is of course Ingrid Persaud. I learned that that it's not a silent D like the French Persaud, but Persaud. Love After Love, which was published earlier this year, and Sean interviewed the author. I will leave a link to that really fabulous interview down below. There are spoilers in the interview, but you get plenty of other stuff if you don't want to listen to the spoilers before you read the book. And Sean also announces the spoilers in time, so you don't get all of a sudden spoiled. But it's a really fabulous interview, and the author is delightful, and the talk is delightful. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this one. What is the book about? Again, the main character's name is, we have Betty Ramdin and her colleague, Mr. Cheaton, and the son, Betty's son, Solo. So those are the three main characters. And after Betty's husband dies, she invites her colleague to stay with her and her son, and they sort of make this new kind of family. But then something happens, and Solo flees from New York to Trinidad, and they reconnect later, and plot and story and drama ensues from there. It sounded really interesting. I loved how the author talked about her book. I loved the fact that she was a lawyer before she started writing. So yeah, all kinds of things sort of came together for me to wanting to read this book. And the second one is also not a recommendation to me personally, or recommendation because Sean hasn't read it yet, but it's on Sean's Pride Month-TBR, and it sounded interesting, and so it made its way on my Pride Month-TBR. And of course you want to know what the book is now, don't you? It's Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker, first published in 1962. The author lived from 1907 to 1968 or something. She was born in Missoula in Montana, where our very own Greg from Supposedly Fun now lives. That was another reason that I thought, oh, that is nice. I want to read this book. This book is about Cassandra Edwards, who is a student at Berkeley, a gay woman, lesbian woman. You don't say gay woman, she's gay, but she's a lesbian woman who goes back to her hometown for the wedding of her twin sister, Judith, who is a straight woman. And then she wants to, Cassandra is set on completely spoiling the wedding for some reason. It sounded interesting. I was a little bit hesitant when I checked out the book, and especially the author, because it turned out that Dorothy Baker was a huge fan of Hemingway. It's not something that I like to read, because I think Hemingway was an ass, first of all, but I don't admire him as a writer either. I think he's really, really overrated as a writer. And I also saw that one of her a book before, I think it was her debut, Dorothy Baker's debut, was quite anti-lesbian. So I was a bit hesitant, but on the other hand, I mean, Sean wants to read the book, and I also wanted to throw in a book that was published some time ago, not very recently. So the 1960s, a publication from the 1960s. So I think it sounds interesting enough, and we will see how Dorothy Baker handles the subject of these twin sisters who obviously don't get along that well. So that sounds fascinating. Anyway, those are the 7 books that I plan on reading in June for Pride Month. And I will probably use, like I said before, I will probably use that bingo card from the Queer Lit Readathon, because I love bingo cards. But I'm not doing the readathon, but I can still use the bingo card, don't you think? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm very much looking forward to talking to you in the comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.